Well, we just took a break because I always start crying when I talk about that. So David we cleaned the freezer bottom drawer out, and David vacuumed the webs that I couldn't reach. And what else did we do? Oh, we took the bugs out of the dining room lights. But I was saying how I used to drive. I didn't know Grandpa too much. Grandpa had a cobbler's shop up the corner on Dwight Street, and occasionally I forget when Grandpa died, how old I was, but let's see, Grandma died when I was at Tanglewood, and I had to come back for that. I remember, so that was 1950. About 1956, I think Grandma died, or 55 or 56. I went to the conservatory from 53 to 57, and Grandma died. And I went the summer of my junior year to Tanglewood. I got a conducting scholarship, and I even conducted a piece of music, Randall Thompson's Alleluia, in front of a big audience. But Grandpa died, I don't know how many years before that, but when I'd go up the corner to Barney's Market, and that's where we did our grocery shopping.
Where was this? We should say where this was.
In the Springfield, Massachusetts. Yeah. We'd go up Morgan Street. I'd go up the street, turn left to go to Barney's Market, and across, that was to White Street. And across the street, Grandpa had a little shop, and he had, I guess he rented the equipment for fixing shoes. He used to resole shoes and put heels on and soles on and fix whatever needed fixing. And I'd come and he'd sometimes have all the nails in his mouth like this, and he would take the nails out of his mouth and then hammer them down.
One second, please.
So I'd go up to farmers to let's see, where was Milton's Butcher? Milton's Butcher was right also on Dwight Street. I think Milton's was to, I don't remember exactly. We lived on a nice street. We lived in between Morgan Street ran perpendicular between Main Street and Dwight Street. And when we went up the corner to Dwight Street, if we turned right, there was Magaziner's Bakery. And we'd get fresh rye bread and fresh bagels. And they used to make a Vienna bread, which was a very light loaf, and it was just all fluffy white bread. You can't get that now. We get water rolls. They call them Kaiser rolls here, but it tasted different. They were crisp on the outside, and occasionally Mama would get the water rolls. And we get flat rolls, which are sort of like Bialys, but they wouldn't have the onions on them. It was just a flat roll with poppy seeds on, and they would be flat, and you should cut them in half, and occasionally we have sandwiches and that. So there was Magaziner's if you turned right. On the corner, there was a corner store and a big apartment house, and different people owned that. And they had, you could go in and get the paper, cigarettes if you bought, newspapers, things like that. Then across the street was Shankman's drugstore. And I remember I drew a picture of sitting at the red stools at the drugstore, and you could get sodas and fraps and have your prescriptions filled. And behind Shankman's is where I remember we lived first before we moved to Morgan Street. That was on Hebron Street. And that was the year, I think it was 1938, that there was a big, bad hurricane. And I remember looking out the window and seeing a man and barrels being blown across the street. The wind was so. And all I remember of that is when Grandma used to come over to visit Mama. But I don't remember too much about that. Just looking out the window at the wind and Grandma coming over to visit. Well, so we had turn right. It was Magaziner's Bakery across the street. That was Shankman's. Then on the other Morgan crossed the other side of the street and go left. There was Milton's, I forget exactly where Milton's butcher was, but Milton, Mama would go up the corner and say, "Come on, Milton, take the fat off of that." And you could, in those days, you used to get the long, and you used to get Milts, the kidneys, and those used to be free, and Mama could make good food out of that. And he used to kill the chickens there, so they'd pluck them in back, and I'd get all the chicken heads for the cat. I had about 21 cats when I went away to college. Only 3 they couldn't catch them. First week I came back home from the conservatory, and I didn't have any more cats except for 3 that they couldn't catch. One of them was the horse. One of them was a 3-colored cat. The horse was a yellow tiger cat, and there was a 3-colored cat. I don't remember what the black one was, if there was a black one. But then Mama was, I'd stand on the, we lived on the second floor, go, and all the cats, when they heard that, they'd come running, and I'd have gone down every day. I'd go down to the butcher shop and dig in the basket and take out all the chicken heads and take out all the scraps, because the kosher butchers have to cut all the fat and all the gristle off of all the meat. So I'd get all the beautiful pieces of liver and meat and chicken heads, and I'd just throw them out on like that, and the cats would come running, and they'd grab onto the head of the chickens. And so we never had to buy, all the years we had cats, he never had to pay anything for cat food because he fed them that. So there was Milton's butcher shop, and then there was Grandpa's, the store, and on that end, a little further down upstairs was my first girlfriend, Gloria McQueen, and we used to walk to school. And then crossing that street, across the street from the butcher, Grandpa's, it was Barney's Market. We'd go to Barney's Market, and I remember one year, when Pesach come, all the foods you'd have to get would be kosher le Pesach. And I came one time and I saw Barney putting labels on the food that already was on his shelf that said kosher for Pesach, and raising the price because those over. So that right away I was beginning to lose my I can't say my respect, but felt funny about the things people would do for Pesach. But Barney was nice. He was a nice man. He had like what you would have you have like farmer's market today. Well, that was Barney. He'd get up early, he'd go to the store, and he'd come back, and he used to run a tab, just put it on the account. And then, so when I'd walk to school, I'd have to go up the corner to Dwight Street, where all these schools are, go left. And after Barney's store, there was McCann's. It was a candy store. And a penny was a lot of money. I remember one time we used to get, you can see sometimes you get the chocolate-covered marshmallow and a long bar that curves like this. I used to get those. And one time I went to school and I had, I don't know, a penny or 2 or 3 cents. And Mrs. McCann was talking to somebody, and I was late. I wanted to get the candy, and they used to lock the doors of the school, and I couldn't get in because I was late. And I remember coming home, and I remember Daddy had a garage in the back, so Daddy was always home. I remember coming in the front of the house and quietly going up the stairs to where we lived. You never went to that. You never saw our house on Morgan Street, did you?
I don't think so.
Oh.
Maybe a long time ago.
No, I don't know. I don't think
Somerset
you ever did.
Street.
Not Somerset, no. Morgan Street's where we live. No, it doesn't.
There was no Somerset?
No.
Oh.
Anyway, I'd walk up and I sat at the top by the door. Finally, I got up enough nerve, and I told Mama I was late. She was a good mama. She never hollered. I can't remember, Mama. Whatever you did wrong, Mama never hollered at us. And so, I don't know if she wrote me an excuse or not for missing school. And what else?
You're talking about your dress?
But also what I remember dress, it was, I remember there was a alleyway. Every time I smell marigolds, I think those are those orange flowers, aren't they, marigolds? Yeah, I think they have a really strong smell. There was an empty lot by the school, and I remember every year the marigolds would come up and smell them. So I think of that a lot. Every time I think of marigolds. What else do I remember about school? I remember that I got a double promotion, and I came home and I said, Ma, I went from first grade. They took me up to second grade because Mama taught me how to read, and I could read when I was in kindergarten, first grade. So I skipped first grade and went into second grade, which always made me a year younger than everybody in the classroom. but that was a nice school. And Mama bought me one year a new dress for school. It was a pretty gray dress, light gray, and it had like a V, same material, but sort of like a bib, but it had white zigzag going all around it. It was so pretty, and a new dress was something special. And in those days, they had inkwells in school because we wrote with wooden pens, and you had to change the nib of the pen and dip it in the ink and then practice your handwriting. And for some reason or other, I couldn't get any ink out of it, so I picked up the inkwell out of the corner of the desk like this, and I went to look at it like that, and the bottom fell out, and ink went all down the front of my dress. And I felt, but Mama didn't holler at me. And she used to take, this was during the war, and she used to take the old things that we didn't wear. I remember she used to cut them, and she used to make rag rugs. You would there's a little metal thing, and you'd put the material in it, and it would curl the material around, and then you just braid that material, and she'd make long, long braids out of the dress that I ruined or any other rags, and then she curled it around each other and then sewed in and out of the sewing. Mama, we had lots of those rugs. Mama was a good sewer. And she told me, you have to show you how I got my scar. Did I ever show you my? It's almost disappeared now. I was ironing for Mama, and I like that. So I was ironing, but I let the iron accidentally fall like this, and I didn't realize it, and it burned me right here. I remember that. It used to be very prominent, but now, after 83 years, it almost went away. And I used to like to help Mama. What else did I do from my childhood? Want to hear about our childhood games? We used to throw balls against the side of the house and play catch. And we used to go after school. Daddy didn't start his business until, I think, around 1947, 1948. The house burnt down in 48. But we used to go out. The streets, there's no traffic like there is today. There were one or two cars. We lived right next to the junkyard from Jen Donato, and there was a Pontiac dealer across the street and on the corner. And so the streets were really empty. All the kids would come out on the street, and we'd throw the ball up, and I forget what we play. You throw the ball up high, and then call somebody's name, and they'd have to catch it, and everybody would run and hide or something. Or we'd throw the ball against the floor and bounce it up high. Or we'd play jump rope, or we'd play hopscotch. Those are the games we played in those days. Or I remember in the summertime when it was hot, we have little corncob pipes, and Mama would make soapy water. We used to blow bubbles. We didn't have that where you blow through and the bubbles go, but that was a lot of fun. And our next door neighbors were the Napolis. See, Bernice didn't have that. Bernice was she was 5 years younger than I, and Betty was 8 years older than I. So they didn't know, but I used to, like David, like you'd go to the neighbors around here, I'd go next door, and Mrs. Napoli, I played jacks with Mrs. Napoli. She had, in the back of her yard, a marble table underneath, like, a wine thing, and she'd play jacks with me. I loved to play jacks. I was very good at it, too. You throw the ball up, and you get the jacks around like that. And and there was a park, and in the park they'd have games. You could go down. It was down Main Street, Calhoun Park it was called. It was across the street from the elementary school we went to Jefferson Elementary School. It's funny, I went to Jefferson Elementary School for kindergarten through fourth grade, and Lincoln Elementary School for 5th and 6th grade. And when I first taught in Mount Lebanon, I taught two schools music. I taught Jefferson and Lincoln School. So those are the two schools I went to, the two schools I taught when I was in Pennsylvania, in Mount Lebanon. But we used to go to the park and we used to play Sorry.
The same names.
The same names. It's Jefferson and Lincoln. And we used to play Sorry. I love the game Sorry. You used to play with David. I love the game Sorry. That was a lot of fun to play. And we played jump rope there, and that they would heat over they would throw water in the middle of the park so there was ice on it, and you could go ice skating in the wintertime. And I was trying to think of
What
what
did you
else.
do for entertainment? Movies,
Well,
music, vaudeville?
the only the entertainment we had, of course, there was no television. I lived in the library when I was growing up. When the summer came, they always had a summer reading club, and the Miss Bayless and Mrs. How do you like that? I can't think of her name. Brown, Mrs. Brown, from junior high school to senior high school, the library was a source of, like you used to go to visit the Doc Chamberlain's, I'd go to the library, and Miss Bayless was there. And we'd sit, and the children's room was downstairs. It was the Carnegie Library, and the downstairs was children's room, and the upstairs was adult room. And I never wanted to go to the adult room. I wasn't interested in adult books. I read almost every single animal story that was in the bottom. I'd always reach the top of the number of books read in the summertime. I spent my summertime reading. I loved reading. And I still have that book, Skaggs and Milk Course, which I always loved. The first time I taught for UC Santa Cruz, when I first taught nonfiction, I had just come back from going to, I went to Washington. I don't know if I was did a workshop there or something. I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., and I think it was because, I don't remember, but I went into the Library of Congress, and I got the book. I looked it up. You can go into the Library of Congress and ask them for any book. And I told this first class that I had that if you ever, I said, I just came back from Washington, D.C., and I went there and I asked for the book, Skaggs and Milk Course, and they had it. So they brought it up, and I remember, I feel just like I used to feel when I was smaller, sitting down on the floor in the corner where all the children's books are, and reading Skaggs and Milk Course. I had that same sensation. And one of the teachers who was taking my course, she didn't say anything, but when she came to the second day of the course, she brought me a copy of Skaggs and Milk Course, and that's why I have it now. She had that book, and she gave it to me, and it was strange that I told them a story about my going to the Library of Congress. Just that year, she was a teacher in a private school in Mountain View. I think it was a Catholic school, I don't know. I told her that story, and she happened to give me the book that, like, 40 years later, I remember reading. That's how these things happen serendipitously, and that was a really nice thing.
What do you remember about brothers, sisters, Jackie, and all the relatives?
You ask for entertainment first.
Oh, yeah.
They're our only means of entertainment. In those days, in the summer, I spent a lot of time reading in the summertime, going to the library. I was going to say the librarians used to cut out by hand because there were no copy machines, anything like that. And I used to help sometimes. And if you got to go behind the desk of a library to a librarian, or even in their own room, that was something special. I used to help. They used to draw these figures, whatever they draw, beautiful princes or queens, whatever, dragons, whatever reaching the different reading levels stood for. And I'd help them. And if my hands get dirty, you'd say, I have to wash my hands. They'd open the door, and you'd feel so strange if they'd walk you into the room so you could wash your hands in the big people's room. And the only entertainment was movies. Daddy worked very hard. He had a garage in our backyard, and they would call him, he was very honest and honorable, and people would call him all night and day, and he'd take care of their cars. And what was I going to say that?
Movies, you talking about?
Yeah, and so his daddy's entertainment was the Court Square Theater, because the Court Square Theater had vaudeville, had live entertainment, and there would be the shows would be Sunday would be a different show. It'd be sort of Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, then Wednesday and Thursday, and then or Wednesday, Thursday, then Friday, a different show, and Saturday. I forget exactly. So he'd go sometimes 2 times a week. It cost for adults, I think it used to cost $0.25. But sometimes he'd take us all and we'd go. And we used to see a movie. It would be something like a cowboy movie or something. And another one, there'd be 2 full pictures. One would be in sort of an A picture, and then it'd be, and then we'd see the news. And then we'd see cartoons, a lot of cartoons, and maybe a short subject. So it was really, and then a live vaudeville show. And the vaudeville would be, we used to see Spike Jones, or magicians, or dancers, or comedy routines like the ones that you'd see with, what's that comedy show about the 2 doctors on stage. The 2 comedians did that, I can't think of the name. What a contemporary playwright.
Ronan Martin.
No, the
Neil
contemporary.
Simon.
Neil Simon wrote something about 2 comedians
Couple?
the 2 comedians.
Oh, the Sunshine Boys.
The Sunshine Boys, yeah. But that was real, and there would be like 2 fake doctors with a beard and a stethoscope, and they come out, and there were those. Today we call them stand-up comedians. There something would be very raunchy, and they'd say funny things, but it was a really mixed bag. And we'd have the dancers, and then they'd have a talent show. And my brother Bert would go to those talent shows, and he won a lot of them because he would play the saxophone. He was very talented, and but that was his entertainment. And sometimes Daddy would take us 2 times a week. So for under $1. I don't know, he probably paid 50 cents, 25 cents, and he paid a dime for me and Bernice or something. It was usually either me and Bernice because Betty was older by that time. And so that was our entertainment. Our other entertainment was we'd go to the Tansers. We'd get in the car and we'd just go there. It was as close as, we go there as frequently as though we lived as close as we do to Jackie or Beth now, where you just get in a car and a couple of minutes go there, but they lived the same as it was 20 minutes, probably take 20 minutes or half an hour, because the cars did. First of all, we didn't have the roads, and the cars didn't go that fast. We had a 38 Buick, I think we had. We used to get all second-hand cars until the mid-50s when we got a new car while Daddy was in business. But we'd all pile in. For what I remember, for some reason, Mama and Daddy went up to Cleveland because, as I remember the story, he had a brother who had a hardware store, and he asked Daddy to come and help him, which Daddy did. When all I remember of Cleveland is Mama holding me in the pantry, and I could see the Zeppelins come in. I remember vividly her holding me and saying, "Look at the Zeppelin," because there was an airfield in Cleveland where they used to come. And the only other thing I remember that is, I guess, sitting in a high chair, she had a Franklin stove in the room, and she used to make chestnuts. And the other thing I remember that is the milkman used to come. It was right after Disney brought out Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, and we used to get, I don't know what came in glasses, if it cottage cheese or something, and we'd wait to see what Disney character was on those glasses. So I remember sitting in the high chair and Mama making the chestnuts, and I remember the taste of the cottage cheese or whatever, eating that, and that's all You have a picture of me on a bicycle. And the little girl.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, remember we looked it up, and that building is no longer there. I don't remember that. Just remember being held and looking at Zeppelins, and
because you were born in Cleveland.
I was born in Cleveland. So I stayed there until I was 2 or 3, I guess, because I went to school early. I went to school at 4 1/2. But I remember Betty wasn't in Cleveland, I think. I think Betty stayed at Grandma. I don't remember that. I don't remember what was in. And I think Burton might have also. I think I was the only one. He went there to help his brother, and then his brother, without telling Daddy, sold the business to a woman, and Daddy was very disappointed. He thought he was going to start a business with his brother. Daddy and Joel's father were the only really honorable men of that family. And so Daddy came back, and I remember driving back from Cleveland to Springfield, and what I remember for there, and Burton maybe was in the car. I just don't remember Burton being there. I remember that Sandy, we came back, I don't know what kind of a car it was, but in those days the front seat of the car had one long seat and Sandy used to sit on that back.
Who was
along
Sandy?
the top, the dog, the one that Barry says is his dog, and it was really our dog that we gave to Tantas because he couldn't keep a dog like that in Springfield. I remember him sitting across the back seat of that car with his head on Daddy's shoulder, and I remember once Daddy getting up by the side of the road and going to the top of the hill and letting Sandy run along free. And I also remember, I think that Mama had a goldfish on the floor. I think there was a goldfish there. Your memory, but I seem to remember a goldfish. But I remember there were no such things as motels in those days. And so I remember the sounds. Whenever I hear the sound at night, there's not much silence when you travel now. But in those days, there weren't much cars. Motors didn't make much noise. It was a lot quieter. And I remember sleeping, and you hear the car coming from far off and then passing by you and going forward. That sound of a single car going by reminds me of the sounds that I used to hear when we traveled there. Don't remember arriving or anything else. When we came, we moved to Hebron Street, where I told you, remember the storm. But that's all I remember of being away. See, but Bernice wasn't even born then. And then I remember when Mama, so I must have been about 4, and then Mama got pregnant with Bernice, and I remember she had no money. We had no money, Daddy. In those days, you could start a business in your backyard, and that's what Daddy did. He bought the house. I don't know. I think he must have paid $600, $700, $800 for the house. I don't remember. He always wanted to buy the house around the corner from Morgan Street, but it was $1,000. And who had $1,000 on those days? He couldn't do that. There was a junkyard in our house, and then behind the other side of the junkyard was this. I forget it was a lane, but I don't remember the name. And he wanted to buy that piece of land, but he couldn't do it. But I remember sitting upstairs. He bought the house, and we rented the bottom house to Mrs. Carter, John Carter. I don't remember what her first name was. Mama sitting at the window upstairs. She's sitting like this, and I think she was envisioning having the baby because Mama had a hard time having children. And my mother, they lost their first one. Their firstborn was a boy, and they lost him. And so then Betty became the oldest. But I remember her looking like this and leaning against her lap, and I think she was thinking of having the baby. I remember that scene, and I remember Daddy taking me to the hospital. And in those days, they would let children in hospitals and wanting to see Mama. And I just remember that I couldn't go up and see her. I don't remember when Bernice came home from the hospital or anything. But I remember Betty. Betty was crazy about Bernice. She used to I think Betty used to have acne or something. She used to take Bernice's diapers, and she used to wipe her face to think that would get the acne off her face. Betty loved, she was crazy about Bernice right from the start. So that's all I remember of the childhood. And Mrs. Carter, I was always handy with my fingers. Mrs. Carter, Mama told me how to embroidery. You've got some of the things I embroidered with Mama. But to earn a living, see, in those days you could do piecework in your home, or you could open a business in your home. And so Mrs. Carter used to do piecework, which means that someone would deliver her big bags of baseballs, raw baseballs. It was just the twine or whatever this thing. and she would get the leather skins, and they were shaped like an infinity, or like sort of they're white, like an 8, and she'd get balls, she'd get the skins, and she'd get the twine, and it was waxed red thread. And so she'd thread the needle, and you'd start at the top, and you'd sew all around. I used to sew almost as many balls and almost as fast as Mrs. Carter did. So my other means of entertainment was I'd go downstairs and I'd sit with Mrs. Carter, just like you visit to talk to the Chamberlains, and I'd sew baseballs with her, and she'd get so much per ball. And then she did 2 kinds of piecework. She used to make doll clothes. And so I could sew, she showed me, and the doll clothes would come. You'd get skirts, and you get bodices, and you get sleeves, and you'd get collars, and they'd be in piles, and then you'd sew them all together to make the doll clothes. So whenever I didn't have anything to do, I'd go down, keep her company, and sew clothes with her. I think those are the only 2 kinds of things I helped with, the doll clothes and that. And then when Daddy decided that he wanted to he wanted the garage, but he wanted to expand and make more money, he decided that he would become a wholesale auto parts dealer. So that's when they had to move out, and Daddy built the counters, and he cleaned out the outside of the downstairs, and he started ordering parts, and there was no discussion of like, do you want to work in the store? Betty, Bert, and Bernice. He had a business, Beverly. He had a business, and you did it. But Daddy was lucky. They had children, especially Betty and me and Bernice, who could do that. You had to, it was funny. He just took for granted that we could do it. And there was no question. I think many of the children in our era whose parents came over, Mom and Daddy didn't come over when they were older, but it was you had to earn a living, and so you did whatever we were lucky. We were very lucky. We had good parents, like they never abused us. They never forced us to do anything, but our family, for some reason, always helped each other and just fell into it, and we were smart enough and to do it. So the customers come in, Daddy said, this is how you look it up. Well, we knew how to read, so we looked it up. We took care of them no matter what time of day, no matter what they wanted. And if we didn't have it, we'd jump in the car and go to another dealer who had it and come back. And so Daddy's business grew like that. But then in '48, it was in February, we had an oil furnace, and something it didn't light, I guess, overnight. And when Daddy went to see if it would light in the morning, Betty and Burton were in, I think they were in New York for something. If it was Betty sort of managed Burton's business, and I don't know what he was doing and what they were doing in New York. I just don't know what they were doing there. I don't remember. Or maybe they were there if it was a World's Fair, but they weren't there. And anyhow, there was an explosion, and all of a sudden Daddy ran up to the house, and he says, come on, you have to get out. The house is on fire. And I remember I tried to grab the cats. A couple of cats were inside, to get them out. And Mama, we never had many nice things, and Daddy was not, nice things was not Daddy's purview. I remember we had furniture, but Mama just got a nice coffee table. It was sort of wood with curved legs underneath, and it had I think it had a blue reflective glass. That was the style. And it was just so nice. And she had just gotten it wasn't a painting, it was a print of a woman in a red dress playing the piano. And it was over the the front of the fireplace upstairs, and she was so happy that she had something nice in the house, because that wasn't at all Daddy's thing. And nice furniture, we had nice living room furniture. We were on the way to becoming a sort of a nice middle class, but maybe lower middle class, but it was nice, had a comfortable home. Daddy had fixed up, he was always handy. He put knotty pine on the walls. We had nice walls, wood, and the front of our house was the bedroom. Bernice and Betty and I shared the front of the house, the bedroom, and Mama had made nice curtains between them, and so we were in bed, and we had, and whenever Daddy, I always tell you should buy good, whatever you buy something good, because you don't have to replace it. And they managed to buy good maple wood, because we lived in New England, good maple wood twin set, and one and two drawers. We had nice things, and I remember running through the house and just getting out. I just had my pajamas on, and then Daddy ran back upstairs, I guess, to see if, I don't know what, but we finally got downstairs, and we could see the flames coming out of the side of the house upstairs. And they Jen did us a favor. They let us go inside to get out of it. It was snowing. It was cold outside. And that just so happened that morning there were other fires, so the fire department couldn't get to our house very fast. So the whole inside was just destroyed, and he had already opened the store, so it blew out. The chimney blew out in front of the downstairs, and in front of that was where we kept the fuel pumps and water pumps and things, and all that went up. And I remember we went over to our grandmother's house to sleep that night, Mama leaning against Grandma's sink and saying, I'll never have another house as nice as that, because my father didn't pay any attention to those things. And that night, I never liked to stay alone, because I slept next door in the, and I forgot her name, my grandma's next door neighbor, and they were gone, but they said I could sleep on the couch while I was there, and all the lights were off, and I remember sleeping on the couch. They went away for a little while. I was all alone, and it was the first time I ever lived in an apartment house, and you could hear people walking on the upstairs and downstairs, and I never heard noises like that. And I saw a light shining. It must have been a car light, and I was so nervous that my eyes blinked like this. I couldn't even keep my eyes closed, and ever since that night I was afraid to be alone in the house alone at night. It always scared me. That's you never were afraid to be alone. Were you in the house when you?
Sometimes.
Oh, I didn't know that. You kept. Oh.
One time in particular.
Oh,
Not most of the time, no.
While you were living here, I never knew that.
One time.
I was always so proud of the fact that you seemed to be so self-contained. What was it that?
Somebody came to the door and knocked on it, and it was at a time that people had been doing that. They were walking and knocking on doors, and so I was in my room. I ran to the Yamasaki's, and then the person came over to the Yamasaki's to say that they wasn't trying to do anything. It just scared me.
Oh,
and then Mr. Yamasaki, Sacha, one of them brought me back.
Really? Yeah. You never told me that.
Oh, you knew. I think you knew it. I just probably forgot.
Oh, yeah. I forgot. Well, anyhow, and it was funny when Daddy left. I thought I was never afraid when he was gone. The fact that I guess I had to be by myself, but it never bothered me. If he was here, who went skiing, and I had to stay alone, I was always kind of nervous. And I used to tell John that. I'd say I have to have the light on. And John told me if Julie went away, he didn't like to be alone either. So when Julie was gone, he would leave the lights on in his house. And as I said, I'm not the only one who feels that way.
Yeah.
So
right here. And Chachkala, of course.
Oh well, I wasn't alone in Chachkala, but what else? So that we had the fire, but it turned out that.
Where'd you end up moving to?
No, we moved. The next day, I think it burnt down on a Friday, so the next Saturday. The next day, we started shoveling the stuff, the parts out, and it snowed and rained, and there was a big part by the side of our house. And I remember the only person who came down to help was Mr. Muckle, a black man. He came down, he brought a pair of gloves, and we stood there and we salvaged whatever we could. The points of condensers Daddy set up in the garage are wire wheeled, and he brushed them, and we started all over again. For we lived a long time when the walls of the house were lath. That was, they didn't have wallboard. You'd have the walls, and then they put up laths, thin strips of wood, and then you put plaster over that, and then I don't know what went over that, but you could see all that wood. We moved right back in. Daddy got 3 army cots, and the beautiful maple wood beds. We got sanders. We sanded by hand. We sanded them smooth, put them back together again. We sanded and got I don't know if it was polyurethane varnish then. We varnished the wood, got new mattresses. There were 2 beds at the cot. We slept in army cots, and we moved back in, and little by little he covered the walls in the knotty pine. And little by little we put down, I remember Mama put down linoleum squares, green linoleum squares. I used to love to wash the floor and get the wax off of it and get each square clean, and then I'd do it over again. I lived like you like to help me. I like to help my mother. And eventually the inside of the house was nice, and then he changed over the garage and moved the part store wasn't in the house anymore. We put that in the garage, and then he got a machine shop, and eventually it came back, but it took many years to do that. But we survived through that, and then and all during that time I was taking piano lessons. Oh, I remember the side of the house, there were 2 windows. They just knocked that wall out, and they came to moving. My piano used to be, as an upright piano, used to be in the hallway just before it'd go down the stairs. It burned. They just pushed it right out of the window, and it just fell to the ground. And then later I wanted a piano, but Burton needed a piano because Burton had a band. And so they went down to Salvation Army, and they found another piano, and they got it. And I always, you never know how you interpret things, but I said, they need the piano because Bert needs it for his band, not because I wanted to practice. But eventually they got another piano, and then I started continuing piano lessons with Ben Kalman. And I would take my piano lessons. I'd go, because the store never closed, so I used to go for lessons sometimes at 9:30 at night. I'd drive down and take it, and he used to sight read with me. Sometimes I went 2, 3, 4 times a night.
The fire was in 1948. You were 14.
I think so. I think I was 14.
But you were doing piano when you could drive. So you had to be at least 16.
Well,
right?
Well, 2 years after that, yeah. But I took piano lessons. I started with Lottie Kammerman, the daughter of the woman where we used to buy my clothes, and she was studying with Ben Kalman, but she was very limited in what she could do, and I was quite talented, and so she took me over. I remember when I went to meet him the first time, I always had perfect pitch, which means he could play a note on the piano. I knew what it was, and I could read and everything. He saw that I had talent. I had musical talent. I didn't have the talent or the drive to become a concert pianist. That was it. But I was talented. Mm-hmm. And so I remember when he played some things, he asked me to play, and he said he would teach me. Those lessons used to cost $4 a lesson, and in those days that was a hell of a lot of money. And sometimes I didn't have it, but he never said anything. And when he saw after the fire and that Daddy didn't like me to spend too much time practicing, Daddy didn't have much patience. And the kind of practicing that the way Ben Mr. Coleman taught you, you'd repeat and repeat and repeat small fragments till you could get those under your fingers, and then you'd link another part. So, and always scales. So I play first parallel octaves, and then then thirds, then eighths, and then sixths, and all those permutations up and down, one octave, then two, then three, then four, slow, then fast. And I played the same thing over and over again, but that's how you learn, that's how you get the fingers. And if Daddy was near, he didn't like that. And also, the piano was in the hall, and television was coming in. And we didn't get a television right away, but we got one. From the time we got the television set was always on. Whether Daddy was in the house or he's down working, if he wanted to come upstairs to get water or to go to the bathroom, the television set had to be on. And my father and I had terrible conflicts because the television set was always on and it was always noisy. And so when I was probably going through the teen years too, I remember we had a violent argument one night. It was so noisy with that damn television set. And I wanted to study or do something, and I couldn't. I said, I'm going to go stay over Grandma's house. And it was a big argument. She said, you're not going to go anywhere. And I said, I can't hear. I can't do anything. And it was on, even if he wasn't in the house, you had to keep it all on. So I didn't go, but we had lots of disagreements. But, so the television set was always on. There was always some work to be done in the house. And I wanted to play the piano. That was my source of pleasure. So I would often go 2 or 3 times a night, and I'd sight read with Mr. Coleman. We'd go through. He had 2 pianos. We'd do through 4-hand pianos. It was an escape the way the Doc Chamberlain, his wife, were. So I don't know. Bert was in Korea, and that was hard. The Korean War. In those days, we get mail twice a day. The mailman would deliver mail twice a day, the way they say, I think they still do in England. I'm not sure, but and if all the fellows that were in the war, if there would be a letter, the post office would sometimes call, say, you have a letter. We'd call up, is there a letter? And we'd run down and get the letter from Bert. So we worked through the Korean War, and then when he came home, I'm rambling now, just think of all things that...
What about talking about just the Tanzers and Jackie, all those
all those years...
relatives?
Well, Uncle Paul, I don't know where exactly he worked. Jackie would be the better word for that. Uncle Paul was the pit orchestra, and he taught violin, and he taught Bernice violin and me violin. He used to stop in on. There used to be a joke. Oh, there's food. The Tanzers are here, but Mama was such a good cook. She was such a good. Her potatoes of flomen and her sour sweet meat and her soups. Mama made a barley soup. I don't know how she did it, and a pea soup. And in those days you could get kishke, which were the intestines. And Mom would take. I remember seeing her cleaning the kishke. She'd turn it inside out, and you'd scrape out all the inside fat. She'd run it through the hot water, pour the boiling water, and then scrape it. And then she'd make kasha. I like the kasha kishes. Kishke is usually potato kishke, but she never made potato. She'd do kasha. She'd fill it with kasha, and then she'd tie off the ends, and she'd put the kasha in with meat. Her gravies were unbelievable, and she'd always have food because she had to feed. There was me, Bernice, and Betty, the 3 of us when Burton wasn't there, and Mom and Daddy. There were 5 people. My mother, and she'd say, I'm on my feet all day, I'm tired, but now I know what she used to mean because she used to do all that cooking, and there was always food. And so Uncle Morris would come up, and then he'd give us violin lessons. And none of us became good violinists. I really wasn't interested in learning the violin so much, or piano was, but it was nice. He gave us lessons, and Bernice. Then you come up and Daddy's sister, Auntie Helen, is always coming up to eat, and Uncle Sam. This painting I have here reminds me of Uncle Sam. You have to, sometime you'll take a picture of that, and that was as though that was their store wasn't quite like that, but he reminded me of. Want to stop and take a picture of it? You can stop and take a picture of it. But he was so nice, Uncle Sam, and Auntie Helen was she was really a Mason. She was a president of the Hillel. She raised money for Israel. She was a real go-getter. She had a huge black pocketbook, and she was fancy dressed.
That was Grandpa's sister?
Grandpa's sister, Auntie Helen. And they had a candy store in an area that would probably be considered, well, there are lots of African Americans, and she used to speak in relatively derogatory terms about them. It used to make me mad. But Uncle Sam he was just a really happy-go-lucky fellow, and he'd come up and he'd joke, and they'd all conveniently come up when it was lunchtime or almost dinner time. So we fed an awful lot of the family. But Jackie and I, for some reason, became very close because there were only 4 years difference between us. We'd go there, and sometimes I'd stay for a few days. As she got older, she'd take the bus in, and we'd go to the movies. And sometimes one time we went to 3 movies at the same. We went to the Paramount, we went to the Lowe's Poli Theater, and we went to the Bijou Theater.
Do you remember the movies?
Those are the names of the movie houses.
Do you remember the movies?
Oh, they were all the movies of the day with Cary Grant, with Clark Gable, Don Amici, Bill Powell, the early dancers, Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, all when the movies were really beginning. We saw that's when The Wizard of Oz and all those movies. And so we'd go to the movies, the Humphrey Bogart movies, and she always treated me. Movies were only 15 cents or a quarter, but what we used to do, get bags of pistachio nuts, and we'd sit there and we'd eat the pistachio nuts, and then somebody would want to come in, and we'd stand up, and the nuts would go on the floor, and then you'd hear all the crackling of the nuts, and we'd feel so bad. But I remember the one time we went to 3 movies, and then she'd take the bus home. We were very close. And there was nothing like sleeping bags. Eddie used to come over, and we'd all sleep in the same bedroom, foot to head or head to foot, or all the heads at the top. And because she lived what was the country. Now her house is in the middle of a city. It was Fairview was next to the airfield base. I can't remember, Westover Airfield Base. And behind her house we'd go, there blueberries, and we could find lily of the valley, the very delicate flower. It used to be open. We'd go there, we'd have hot dog roasts. Mom would go to Schneider's Delicatessen. The delicatessens in those days were different than now. Schneider's used to have a big steamer, and he'd take out these big pieces of corned beef, and it was loaded with fat, because that's the best part of it. And you could just get that smell. And he had where did we go for half-sour pickles? I don't know if we get them I don't know if Schneider's had them, but they had barrels of it. I think maybe at Barney's had barrels of half-soured pickles, and you just can't get that. Say they'd be in wood. You can't get that smell, that delicious smell of the old delicatessen. And so we'd pick up. Corned beef was more expensive than just plain hot dogs. Occasionally we'd have corned beef, but Mom would get a couple dozen hot dogs, and we'd go to the Tanzers. And I don't think they didn't have Weber barbecue pits. They'd just make a fire, and we'd make the hot dogs. and we'd have, and everybody would bring something. And I remember staying over. My favorite food when I went to Auntie Sarah's was bread and mustard bread. I used to like to eat mustard on bread. Life was very simple. We didn't know that we were monetarily constrained, if you will. And the entertainment, we'd be at Auntie Sarah's house, and the people that Mama grew up in Springfield. I didn't realize until I learned later from Mama that she never graduated high school. Mama would have loved it, but she had to go to work for her family. I never realized that. She really only got to a reading comprehension level, I would say, about 6th or 7th grade, because I don't think she went much beyond. I don't even think she got up to 9th grade, but she had to go and support her, because Grandpa didn't make much money as a shoemaker. I don't even really know how they lived or how they had money. But things so it seemed from a child's viewpoint that like when Daddy needed some money, I think after the fire, he went to the Hebrew Free Loan, and they gave him money, and there was no interest on that. And I told you, I remember taking a quarter or a dime or 15 cents and going down and putting it on account, because that was a lot of money. But one thing about Daddy, no matter who he owed when the house burnt down, he paid back every penny. He didn't default on any of his loans. He was very
honest,
and he knew the importance of having good credit. In those days, you could pay your bill, and we weren't making that much money, and he knew how to buy things. He used to buy oil by the carload, the train carload, and it was totally dependent upon him to go out and sell it. He'd buy big barrels of oil, and we said, who the hell's going to buy that? How are we going to sell that? And he'd buy half barrels, and then he'd buy cases, and the three of us, Betty, Benice, and Beverly, lifted the cases, we kept the mufflers and the tailpipes and the exhaust pipes down in the cellar, and we kept the oil in the yard, because in the summertime was the barrels, and we had like 50, 60, 70 cases of oil, and 30 weight oil, and 20 weight oil, and 40 weight oil, and 60 weight oil, and transmission oil, and all those kinds of, and every time he'd do that, Betty would say, that's too much money, and he'd buy it, and we'd have to figure out how to pay it and how to sell it. But you used to pay the bills, you used to get 2% 10th procs. That means if you paid your bill before the 10th, by the 10th of the following month, you got a 2% additional discount. So she would make out the checks, and we would drive down to the post office at 11:30 at night, and we put the checks in, because if we got them in before 11:30, they'd be postmarked the 10th. And so that could be 2%. That's how close we were to the money. And we had to make sure that she took the money out of the till before Daddy would get to it, so we had enough money for Mama to buy groceries or everything. And she was so good. She was always conscious of appearance. She would buy us, we had jackets. That's at Mason Auto, so there was some dignity, some, it looked a little more professional, but she did that without Daddy's permission. She just did what she thought was necessary, because Daddy just worked at anything, and Mama used to have to quick get his clothes and wash them out fast, so that he never bothered with that. And in those days, they didn't think much of putting your hands in gasoline to wash the grit and the oil off of it, so we used to wash our hands. That's why I have to take a shower still all the time, because we used to go into the machine shop and we used to turn the valves, and the metal dust, and if you relined the brakes, or Betty didn't work in the shop, but Bernice and I used to do that, because Bert wasn't there. We could be take off, stamp on the machine, break out the old rivets for the old shoes. Then you'd have to put the shoe, metal shoe like this, and you'd have to clean it off on the wire wheel, and then you'd have to put the new brake lining on it and put the rivets in, start at the center and step on the machine, you rivet it, and then sometimes you'd make sure that the ends meet, and you'd get all that dirt, and we'd stick our hands in the gasoline and wipe the grease off our hand, and it'd be in our hair and everything. So I was always had to take a shower. It was interesting. I don't know that it's over. Really, we learned an awful lot. Learned how you treat customers. I went with Bernice. She went to the store. Betty had an earring she lost. And so we went into Tiffany's, and Bernice showed the woman the earring, wanted to get another earring like it. So the woman sits there, and Bernice and I are on one side of the counter, and the woman's on the other. And she's sitting there looking, typing, and no communication going for a minute. So finally I stood up and I said, "What are you doing?" And I looked over at the machine, and finally she said, "Oh, well, I'm looking at..." I said, "I want to see what you're doing." Because I didn't know whether she didn't talk to us. She didn't interchange. And Bernice was behind me, trying to pull me down. And I said, "I don't know what she's doing. We're sitting here doing nothing." And I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "Well, I'm typing in and looking at all the different styles of earrings." And I thought to myself, at Mason Auto, because it was our business, when the customer could say, "I'll be right with you. Excuse me for a minute while I'm doing this. I'll be with you. I'm looking up now to see if I can find the part. I can't find, so I'm looking." She could have said, I'm putting in information here, and I'm looking to see what the different things are. You communicate. So working behind the counter, I learned how important it is that you communicate with people, that you treat them as people. I learned how to sell things. I remember there never used to be directional signals on cars. And I remember when they first came out after the war, they used to come out in boxes like this, and there'd be 2 yellow lights, one for each side of the car, and a switch box that you put on the steering wheel with a lever. And when those came out, they're also the same people that made that. They used to make a bull's head with horns, and the horns lit up, and the eyes lit up. And so I remember when they came in, I used to be a good salesman. And I used to, and who needs that? But I used to sell a lot of things. I was a good, you learn how to sell, you learn how to communicate with people, you learn how to be polite with customers, you learn how to make them welcome in your store. And I learned a lot. I learned about, discounts. I know that, like I had the fellow come in and give me the price on the termite inspection. I know in my head that when he drove up, he had a price, he wouldn't go any lower than that, because he said to me, $2,500 and we'll do this. And then, well, he went outside, and I said, a little on the bridge. He says, "I'll throw in the bridge, won't charge you anymore." And then we went into the new garage. He felt, "Well, I'll throw in the old garage." And then went to the new garage, which has really got termite damage. "I'll throw that in." His price was, but each time he tried to make me think that I was getting a bigger deal. And then he was saying, we gave you the 25% from our television ads, and then we gave you the 10% from our radio ads. But I learned about that. I said, "I know I've been in business, and I'm happy with what you did." But I learned about business. I wouldn't have known anything about how you conduct business, how to be a salesman, how to be nice to people. Went out on the road and selling, and that transferred into what I was doing as a teacher. Because when you're teaching, you're selling what you want to teach to your students, and all that. I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot about ethics from my father, because he was very honest. I learned about making a profit. I often told you the story. I went to the junkyard to get an old piston for Daddy that he needed. Well, now a used piston is very reasonable at $4.50. A new piston would cost maybe $15 or $20. I bought the piston at the junkyard and I paid 50 cents. So when Daddy said to the customer, "You're a good customer, that's all right," he said, "This would cost $4.50, but I'll split it with you because I know it's $2.50." And so Daddy made $2 profit. He saved the man $2. The man's happy. Daddy's happy. We made some money. And so you learn how to. I learned things I never would have learned anywhere else. And I learned from my mother. She kept the family fed. Always something new. Whoever came up to eat, because we never could eat during the day at the same time because you couldn't leave the store empty. So Bernice would come up, then Betty would come up, then I would come up, and if somebody came in while I was upstairs, I'd have to go down, take care of him, then come up to my co-meal. It was very disorderly, but she'd always say, "I made it especially for you." Everything she made was especially for you.
Yeah.
I mean, Mama had her own things, and she had to put up with that. So as bad as it wasn't at all as bad as I've read about other families who've come in and been in the family business. So
Who were the customers?
the neighborhood mechanics, and they'd always, and with their poor, like they would come in and they would do a job. They need bearings, crankshaft bearings. Sometimes crankshaft bearings are half moons that come together, and the piston goes up and down. It turns around, and it goes like this, and so there's constant friction between the bearings that are around the outside. They take tin cans, and they'd cut them and put them on, and so when the customer came in and drive out, it sounded good, but it would only last about 2 weeks or something, and the tin cans would do a lot. They would try all kinds of tricks. They would, and so I learned about the way some people were unethical and would just get anything to sound right. The customers are the local mechanics. So some mechanics, like Daddy, were always, they gave you your money's worth and they fixed it well. And some who cheated you. I mean, the customer, we never sold or did a job that wasn't well done.
Let's segue to college.
College?
Doing the Conservatory of Music. Yeah. Is there anything else from the childhood?
There's lots more that I remember.
Okay.
I know I wander all around.
Go ahead. Go.
Well, to go to college.
No, I mean, if there's anything else in the childhood,
Well, if I could do it again to think of other things, but...
Did you talk about you talked about going to Benice, to the Tanzers, right?
Yeah, that would...
Did you ever take any trips? Did the family ever take any trips? Even if it's a day trip or...
Well, I remember when I was little, we'd go... Once the business opened up, once we had the store, David, we couldn't leave the house. Very rarely could we all go away.
What was your dog's name?
Tippy and... the dog was Tippy.
Yeah.
I think we only had one dog, Tippy. I don't know what I had a cat that was... don't remember my cat's name. When Bert went to Korea, I moved into his room so that there was only Betty and Bernice each in the bed, because one of us was always sleeping on a cot when Bert was there. And I moved into his room, and his bed was right against the window, and I remember looking out the window and thinking what it'd be like to be a cat, walking on the rooftops or walking around. But our entertainment was going to the Tanzers, maybe a movie. Occasionally, Mom and Daddy would go alone. They didn't. The business ruled our life.
Did you listen to the radio at all? Was it like Jack Benny or...
Oh, yes, on the radio. I'd come home from elementary school, Mom would be listening to Helen Trent, and there's an old hotel, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
I forget what that was too.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, we listened to the radio loudly. Jack Benny, that's why I still have the tapes, unless I gave them to the library. And Amos and Andy, And the Dad and I loved to listen to George and Martha. The radio was, and every time I came home, because you used to come home for lunch. There wasn't lunch in schools until we went to junior high school. Mama would be listening to her radio shows, and I'd listen to Helen Trent to come home. And Mama always had a hot lunch. It was never sandwiches. She'd make me something hot for lunch, and then you'd walk back to school. There were only lunches, and the lunches we used to take to junior high, because I rarely bought a lunch, because Mama used to keep kosher, and it was money. So I used to take a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a tuna fish sandwich. That was the usual bag lunch that we used to take. And we didn't have backpacks in those days, so we'd go to school carrying our books and our lunch and everything in our arms. But the entertainment was going to the Tanzers or during the day listening to the radio. Oh, and during the war you had blackouts. You'd have to make sure that your curtains were all down, and we'd listen to the Lux Radio Theater. And on Saturday mornings it used to be Let's Pretend, which was fairy tales, excellent dramatizations, and Grand Central Station. And there were either mysteries or radio was very, very good. Fibber McGee and Molly.
The Whistler.
The Shadow Knows.
Yeah.
All those programs. They were very innocent entertainments, and I don't know if I heard it or not. I don't remember hearing the War of the Worlds.
Oh.
But because I remember the uproar that it made. And we used to listen to the fights. There was no time. I remember listening to, and may have been Joe Louis, I remember Daddy used to like to listen to the fights. You know, you just sat on the couch, you wouldn't even have the lights on, and you'd listen to the radio. And I do remember the fights we never were baseball fans. And there was no such thing. I suppose they played basketball, but sports weren't at all like they are now.
And basketball started in Springfield. Were you even aware of that?
I was never interested. I used to like to play badminton when I was good, but other than that, the sports didn't interest me. I was not very well coordinated, and Mama was afraid of the water. So when we were small, we used to go to the beach, but the family day. But I remember they used to get little rubber shoes like these, and to walk on the beach. But it was Mama couldn't swim.
What beach was that?
We'd go to Hartford, Connecticut. We'd go to Connecticut Beach. I remember we'd approach it. Mama would say, "Oh, the luft, the smell," and we'd smell the thing. But we didn't.
That's a good memory.
And just to go to the Tanzas for our hot dogs, and they'd start the fire. We'd have hot dogs on buns, and then the picture we have of all the pictures of the Kleins from New York, poor Tanzers. They had because they were in the country house, and they had a house. Families from New York would come and visit them and stay for a week or two, and they wouldn't bring food or anything.
Did anybody have any bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs?
Bert,
No.
I don't know. I think Burton might have, but it wasn't a big thing.
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't.
Did any of the
know.
Tanzers?
No, I remember. No, they didn't. They didn't follow go to Hebrew school. I remember I went to Hebrew school, and I went to Hebrew school, but I remember I wanted to get I used to get 4 little scrolls for something I used to remember. I'd tell, what was the rabbi's name? I don't remember, that he should give me one of those, and I would do something. I don't know if they ever did it or not. But he just went because he went. Daddy never went to shul, and the famous words of my brother Bert was that he couldn't go to shul because he didn't have a hat. But I remember going to shul for the Simchas Torah was when we'd have a Israel flag. You put an apple on top of the flag, and you put a candle on top of that and light it, and you'd walk around the inside of the for Simchas Torah. That's a happy occasion. But they used to have, the women would be upstairs in the balcony and the men would be downstairs. And we used to gather, but I could read Hebrew. I could read it fluently because I took easily to languages, but it didn't. It for some either it sinks in, it didn't. It never bothered me that in school I sang Christmas carols. They were just words, meaningless words to me, so I sang them, but they didn't mean anything to me. It never affected my beliefs. I never converted to the idea of Christ, and that never appealed. It just the way the Judaism, to me, Judaism makes more sense because the Jews, the rabbis are always arguing about the interpretation. You're right, and you're right. And so they talk some more, and you'd say, you're right, and you're right. So the idea that you could constantly being interpreted, and nobody was saying that there's only one way, that much I like, except with Orthodox Judaism. Of course, they believe only their one way. So just like the discussion yesterday, we're cultural Jews. The guy who wrote Blazing Saddles.
Mel Brooks.
Yeah. He said he's a cultural Jew, but not a religious Jew. Everything about religion offends me. If you want to be spiritual, that's fine, but not where somebody says the only right way is for you to do this, and everybody has to do that. So, but and as far as going to college, we'll stop now because it's been going a long time.